talk a little bit about the Jim Gaffigan story that's going around today. For those that might not know, last night during I guess it was the final night of the Republican National Convention, Jim Gaffigan, who's a comedian in America, typically like pretty clean in his comedy, doesn't get controversial, doesn't curse, not political, kind of safe topics. Went on, I guess, what would be called like a Twitter storm with a series of tweets about Trump and the GOP in general, mostly about Trump though, but you know, I think Barr was included in it and some others, and really strong worded, opinionated views about Trump and the GOP, and that he thinks, you know, Trump's a con man and a criminal, and kind of down that path. So a lot of people are talking about it today, and no surprise, there's differing views on it. Some people feel like he overstepped and they're not going to be his fans anymore, and you know, he went too far and he should have kept his political views to himself, you know, and he was too strong worded and he was offensive and insulting, etc. And obviously there's people on the other side who are applauding him and saying, you know, thank you for standing up and stepping up for what you believe in, etc., etc. So my take on it is, firstly, I think that if you have a view or a belief, you are well within your rights to share it. People may not like it. People may not agree with it. Some people may even think it's dangerous or hurtful or whatever it is. But assuming it's not directly dangerous, right, calling for violence or something, I think you share your belief. If that's what you feel, you share it if you want to. What I try and do, though, is I try and separate what you have a right to do, what you're entitled to do, what you could do, versus what's productive and logical. Now, I make that distinction because that's where I want to focus most of this, is around, you know, the question to me isn't should he have done it, did he have a right to do it, right? He can and should say whatever he wants. The question comes down to what was his objective, and was it rational and logical towards that objective? That's what's most relevant to me. And I should say up front, you know, this is my take on it, and I'll say this throughout. Maybe he knows better than I. Maybe he understood better than I do, and what he did is going to turn out to be super logical, super productive, super beneficial. It might. I struggle with it right now, though. Again, just from what's the objective? Are you meeting it? I assume, right, or at least part of what you'd have to assume is his objective is he does not want Trump to be president anymore. He thinks he's a danger to the country, and he wanted that to be known. Now, it's entirely possible that he was literally just venting. He didn't have an objective beyond that. He just felt like, hey, I need to speak my mind, and I'm going to do it. You know, once you put it on social media, you start to question that objective a little bit, because you could have wrote it in your diary, you could have texted it to some friends, you could have talked to your wife about it or your partner. When you put it on social media, seemingly you're looking for people to see it. You're trying to send a message out. So I don't think it was just pure venting. I think he wanted to get the word out. And from how he spoke in the text, his rhetoric suggested he was trying to convince people of something. There was a number of times in which he was telling people, like, to wake up, you know, wake up to this, wake up to that, or, you know, this is happening, you know, deep down that's happening. So seemingly, and I think a few times he explicitly did it, he was speaking to Trump supporters or GOP supporters, right? So I can only guess, but based on that evidence, my read is his intent was to try and convince people who don't think like him, who support Trump, that they're mistaken, which is a totally fine objective. I think, you know, it's something that you could try and do if you feel strongly enough about it. I come back to the point, though, of was his approach the logical approach to meet that objective? That's where I think it falls down for me. Again, the language that was used, there was probably a series of about 20 or so tweets, and they were pretty, you know, there were some curses in there. They were pretty passionate and emotionally charged. But my biggest issue with it was there was a lot of, as I said, these types of statements like, you know this is happening, you know that's happening, you know if he gets reelected, this is going to happen, you know he's lying, you know he's cheating, you know he's a terrible president, right? I'm not quoting him exactly, but that in that vein. As I mentioned, there was a lot of wake-ups, like, hey, people, you need to wake up and see this. You need to do this. And that runs right into, an area for me where I say, like that's not it, right? I talk about it all the time: certainty, that approach, balance that's needed, all different things. When you're talking to people who hold an opposing view, the odds of you browbeating them into agreeing with you, insulting them, or taking some sort of, not even just a moral high ground, but almost an intellectual high ground, that you clearly see it better than they do and know it better than they do, very rarely is going to work. What you often get, as I've talked about before, is you get people that dig in further. And I guess the other big issue with it is, when you're accusing a politician of lying or being a cheat, and I think at some point he's even knocked like Fox News. And I should say, I don't necessarily disagree with any of his sentiment, right? Let's even put that aside. Let's assume he was right about what he was saying. Let's take the Fox News piece. If you're going to knock Fox News, if you're going to knock certain politicians, you have to, in my opinion, you have to be objective. And you have to acknowledge, you have to build credibility if you want people to listen to you. You have to have them understand that, hey, my goal in this isn't just to get you to see it exactly my way because I think I'm better than you. I'm going to show you my work, right? As I would talk about, it's like in a high school math test. I'm going to show you my work of why this is what I believe. And let me show you that I'm being objective. Let me show you that my goal is what's best for the country and what's best for all of us. So I'm going to show you that, hey, I think CNN or MSNBC or whatever the other news agency is lies sometimes or manipulates facts, or here's some instances where that happened. And here's some other politicians on the other side that I don't like because they do things similar. Without any of that, without showing your work, without showing your objectivity, without showing that your objective is pure and in good faith, it leaves too many outs. For that same exact audience that you're trying to reach, where seemingly your objective is to change their mind, you've given them far too many outs to dismiss what you're saying, to say it's not credible, to say it's biased, it's not objective, and they're not going to listen. They don't want to listen to begin with. And seemingly your goal is to try and change that. The approach taken by Jim Gaffigan in that, to me, goes against almost every rule on how you would do that, right? We've talked before about this idea of overwhelming people with just emotion and rhetoric and extreme talk. It rarely works from what I see. Now, again, maybe I don't know. Maybe he knows better than I, maybe others do. And the idea is if you flood it enough on something like Twitter, it's going to get enough trending, it's going to get enough people excited, and maybe you will convince some people. Maybe he has some diehard fans who are just willing to listen to him, and he's going to convert some people over. Maybe the idea is just to galvanize people that already feel the way he feels, and they're going to be more likely to vote. Maybe, right? They're certainly possible. But I go back to the point that it seems like from his language that the objective was to speak to people that didn't see it his way. He was trying to change minds. And if you're trying to change minds, from where I sit, the best way to do that is to show that you're doing it in good faith and genuinely. To show that you are being as objective as you can be. You're calling a spade on either side, right? You're being consistent in your approach. You're showing your work to prove that out. Now, somebody might say, like, hey, that's a pretty high burden you're putting on somebody to do that. It is. It's true. And it may seem unfair. It may seem unnecessary, right? And it may be unfair, but I don't think it's unnecessary. I think if your goal is the goal that it seemed, I'm trying to convince somebody of something, there's a way in which you do it if you truly want to achieve that objective. And I don't think Jim Gaffigan did that. It says nothing about his views and his right to say them. He has every right in the world. It says nothing about if he was correct or incorrect in what he believed. It's just simply about if you had an objective, did you take the logical actions to reach it? And I don't believe he did.